Hello, everybody, and welcome to Jack's Corner. I'm your host, Tarzan Banano, and with me, as always, is our founder, Jack Figgle. Today, we are still in the midst of our papal audience stories, but today, Jack is going to jump ahead a little bit and talk about a papal audience he had with our dear Pope Francis. How you doing, Jack?
Good, Tarzan. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory to him forever.
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful, sunny, crisp day here in Washington, and but we're expecting rain and storms over the weekend, as everyone is getting these days. But today is a nice, crisp, bright, sunny day. So I'm glad to be with you from Washington. Actually, Fairfax, Virginia, outside of D.C. But
Close enough.
that's right.
Like I would say
Uh,
I'm in Cleveland, but technically that's not where I'm at.
right. So yes, the as we've been discussing the last few sessions, I've been blessed to have 7 private audiences with the last 3 popes, and so today I thought we would jump a little bit in time, um, because it was a very special uh, visit in the year 2014. And so, in fact, it was 10 years ago, uh, this coming fall,
The year
in
after he
October.
took office.
That's right. It was shortly after he was elected. I was contacted uh, earlier in the year, right after he was elected, um, by Viking Travel, the folks who do the river cruises and now ocean cruises, and are well known for their tours and travel specialty trips, by their office in Chicago that handles custom faith-based pilgrimages. They have an office that does nothing but create custom religious pilgrimages. Um, I think probably exclusively for Christians, but I'm not sure about that. So
Well,
anyway,
bless them.
yeah,
Bless them
they
for
they
doing that.
contacted me, and they said, we want to put together an ecumenical pilgrimage to Rome and Istanbul. They knew it by Istanbul, of course. We Easterners call it Constantinople.
It will always be Constantinople.
That's right. Um, and she said, we started with Father Thomas Loya in Chicago, who's local to us, and we know him because we've been to his parish. And he told us if we were going to do a trip to Rome and Istanbul, that we needed to have you, Jack Figgle, help us plan it and organize it, and that you had amazing connections and access in those places. And so we're contacting you and asking if you would join us in putting together this trip. So I, of course, had to say yes. It sounded like a wonderful opportunity. They flew me out to Chicago at their expense. We spent a day. I stayed with Father Tom at his parish. We spent a day at the Viking office and met with 2 or 3 staff people and Marge Santo, who is the head of that office. She's in charge of all their custom pilgrimages and goes on some of them. And she said, this is the first time that we've ever tried to do a trip to Rome that might include a private audience with the Pope. First time in Vikings history.
So they must have been excited for their own self, business wise.
They were very much so. And in fact, so much so that Marge herself came on the trip.
She had to.
Yeah, because she said it was the first time that they've ever had the opportunity for a private audience or to have the chance to meet the Pope. And I said, well, it's not guaranteed because we were planning this like, months and months in advance to put everything together. And I said, I've met previous popes. I have not yet met this Pope, Pope Francis yet, but I know how to get audiences scheduled and arranged for groups. I've done it for myself a couple of times and for others. So let's give it a shot. And then I said, I know for sure I can get an audience if we go to Istanbul with the ecumenical patriarch, because I've met him, more than a dozen times. He almost, by now he does, but at that time, 10 years ago, he sort of knew me pretty well. I'd been to see him enough times. And I said, if you want to go to Istanbul and Rome and make this a truly ecumenical trip, I think I can get us an audience with the ecumenical patriarch. So we agreed, and I went out and we sat down and we spent a day planning the itinerary and working up what we wanted to see in addition to those special events, and came up with, I think it was about a 10-day trip that was scheduled in October of 2014. And in order to save on travel expense, I went and, because I've done it before, identified the flights that seemed to make the most sense. And if we used Turkish Airlines, they have the best airfares in the industry. And especially if part of your itinerary is going to Istanbul, if you include Istanbul in your trip, either to or from or both or in between, you really, really get good, cheap airfare. So I made all those recommendations. I found the flights and then started to work up a schedule. And we sat and put all that together. And then they went off and did their thing of starting to make the logistics arrangements for that. And then I did the other side. I started to write letters to request the audiences and meetings with other officials, especially in Rome. In Constantinople, the Phanar, which is equivalent to the Vatican, is only about 20 or 30 people. And they're all within a 2 or 3 block enclave, which is known as the Patriarchate. So there's not a whole lot of places to go or things, people to see, compared to the Vatican, where you've got thousands of people, part of the Holy See, and lots of officials and things for us to go see. So, and then we both started marketing and announcing the trip. Viking promoted it as one of their trips, and I promoted it to my customer base. And we started taking reservations. And sure enough, it filled up, actually. I don't know that we turned anyone away, but we had a really, really nice size of about 40 people, which is a full busload. Most of us left from here in Washington because there's a nonstop to Istanbul that, and a lot of the people that were coming from the eastern seaboard, the middle Atlantic states. So they all drove to Washington. And then there were, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 people. Some flew from California, some from Chicago, 1 or 2 from Texas, and Viking took care of all the travel arrangements, all the flights, and dealt with all the customers in terms of bookings. So we scheduled it to fly nonstop and arrive in Istanbul on the 26th. And we had, like I said, about 40 people in total. We scheduled it so that we left on a Sunday night and arriving on Monday, so that priests that wanted to come could finish up their services Sunday morning and then come to the airport and leave with us. So we started. We had an English-speaking tour guide in Istanbul, and the first day we sort of hit the highlights of some of the main places you visit when you go to Istanbul. So we went to the Church of Christ the Savior in Hora, which means in the field. And that's where the famous mosaics, not so much paintings on the wall, frescoes. And the most famous one is the one of Christ raising Adam and Eve from the tombs that symbolize the resurrection. The original of that is in one of the chapels of that church.
Yes, one of the most rare icons I've heard about,
Mhm.
and I want it. I want a
Yeah.
replica.
Yeah, well, one of these days, Tarzan, we got to get you on a trip, because to see it in person is nothing like to see a picture or a reproduction of it.
Yeah, I'm sure of that.
We also went to the Church of St. Mary in Blaherna, which is still a functioning Orthodox church. The Christ the Savior in Horror is a uh, museum run by the government. And there's actually a fee to get in that Viking paid for us all to go in as a group. And then was interesting. We had someone with us who was an expert in iconography, and the tour guide said, well, for licensing and official approval, I have to be here and I have to be giving you the tour. But if one of you wants to add some commentary after mine, feel free to say a few words, but keep it to a whisper, because if the officials see someone else giving a tour other than a licensed tour guide, we'll be in trouble.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, they take their tour guiding seriously in Istanbul and in Turkey in general, because that's one of their major industries is tourism. So we went to Blaherna. Now, Blaherna is the church where tradition has that Mary appeared, I think it was about the 9th century, over the church holding her veil to protect the city from one of the invasions that was being attempted at the time. And that is now the feast that in the Slavic world we commemorate as the protection, the Pokrov, the protection of the Mother of God. And that was the church where the event took place that we commemorate. And we were in that church. And as part of our trip, we had a prayer service there in the church where she appeared. So it was, for those who knew what we were doing, it was very, very special.
Like she appeared at the church, or the church was built at the site of her apparition?
I think the building that's there today is a replacement, but there was a church there, and the vision is of her appearing within the church that was there.
Okay, so it was in the church, and then I'm
Yeah,
sure the church name was changed because of it.
That's right. And the foreign invaders were at the walls. The people gathered in the church to pray, and she appeared, and the foreign invaders were beaten back. That's the closest summary of the story that I know.
And that's as much as most people would need to know.
Right. And then we also went to Church of the Pantokrator, which has a beautiful, of course, Pantokrator up in the dome, and those were the sites we visited. We also went at the very beginning of the day to the Church of St. Anthony in Padua, which is the largest Roman Catholic church in Istanbul. It's near what's called Taksim Square, which is the big business district, and so it's a different part from where the Fenar and other sites are located. It's across the Golden Horn in the business district, and so we to be ecumenical, we went to a Roman Catholic church, and then to a functioning Orthodox church, a monastery, and a museum, and that was our first day.
Take me to all the above.
Yeah, that's right. Tick all the boxes. That evening, we wanted to make this educational besides just going to tour places. And in the evening on that first day, the full day of touring, we invited our special tour spiritual leader to give a reflection. And that was none other than Metropolitan Kallistos. He actually was on our trip the whole time for 10 days. And he was our spiritual director. And that first night in one of the meeting rooms of the hotel, he gave us a little talk about what we had seen and the other things we were going to see in Istanbul.
So when the tour guide said, if you want to give more exposition after I'm done, but do it in a whisper, he was talking directly to Callistos?
No, there was someone else who knew icons. Callistos did the more spiritual things in the evening. So yeah.
I'm just imagining the tour guide somewhat recognizing him and be like, please don't screw my job.
Well, unless the tour guide knew his face, because in Istanbul, clergy cannot wear clerics. They have to go around in civilian clothes. And that's because the government considers clerical dress a throwback to the days of the Byzantine Empire when the clergy were part of the government. And since the Turks conquered Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, wearing clerical dress in public is actually against the law. You can be arrested if you have a cassock on as an Orthodox cleric.
That is the most upsetting thing I've ever heard. But you know what?
Yeah.
We're illegal in over like 52 countries, so it makes sense.
Yeah, and now the Catholic priests can wear a collared shirt as long as they don't wear a cassock, and they're okay. But the Orthodox don't even wear a collared shirt because, of course, a collared shirt is really not an Orthodox tradition. You don't see a lot of priests dressed that way, except in modern places like conferences and stuff. A lot of Orthodox, come in cassock because that's their walking around the street kind of dress is a cassock.
Mm-hmm.
The second day in Istanbul, we went to a place called the Spice Market, which is down near the Golden Horn and the big transportation hub where all the ferries come in. There's a big train station, and there's this large building with all these hundreds and hundreds of little shops that have all these exotic spices. And there's a big square right next door. And so we all were dropped off at the spice market. Everyone had a little time to go a little shopping. And then we were shown over to where the ferries come in. And we had a private charter tour, what's called the Bosphorus, which is the waterway, of course, between Europe and Asia that goes from the Sea of Marmara, which is connected to the Adriatic and the Mediterranean Sea, between there and the Black Sea. And it's a very narrow waterway that's very strategic in terms of commerce as well as political and military power. And it is lined with castles all along. So it's usually one of the features of my trips is to take one of these custom boat rides for 2 hours or so to go up and down the Bosphorus in a charter boat and have a tour guide explain all the places we're seeing. The other thing that's interesting, that's unique, is that all along the shorelines are either very, very, very rich homes. People who have lots of money have a home right there on the water, at the water's edge, like along, a river in New York or say something. Also lined along the waterway are all of these palaces that have large harems or harems in them. And they date from the time of the Ottoman Empire, which the sultans ran up until World War I, when they were defeated as part of the Axis powers of Germany and Austria. The Ottomans joined in with the Germans and so forth. And when the armistice came, the Ottomans lost a lot of their territory, especially in the Middle East, to the British. But in Istanbul, that was the headquarters, the center of the Ottomans, and they have palaces all over the city. And the more extravagant ones are the ones that are right on the waterline that you see from this Bosphorus tour. That was pretty much our second day. The third day, we went to more Christian churches. The principal Greek Orthodox Church is the Church of St. George. It still functions, and it's the cathedral adjacent to the Ecumenical Patriarchate's offices, and so it's essentially the St. Peter's of the Orthodox world, in that it's the center where the Patriarch himself goes to serve or to preside, which is what he does most times. Another, thing about the situation there is that the Turkish government only allows the Patriarch to celebrate the Divine Liturgy on major feast days and only a limited number of days per year. And so most of the time, he simply goes into the church from his office and presides from the throne and gives the blessings and leads some of the prayers, like at Vespers. He will do the Psalms, or he'll do, some of the changeable parts. And this ecumenical patriarch, who's been on the throne since I've gotten involved in all this, has a very deep, booming baritone voice that's lovely to listen to.
Real quick, it just sounds like that whole government is afraid of God being in charge again. That's what it sounds like.
Well, yeah, they were founded by Ataturk after World War I to be a secular society, and so
afraid of God.
That's right, exactly. So you're right. They are afraid of God, no matter what God. They're afraid of God, period. Unfortunately, the Islamic religion is like 98% of the population. And in recent years, since Erdogan has been president, they have taken a right turn into becoming almost an Islamic state under his leadership. And so they've abandoned their secularism for much more radical Islamic attitudes and policies that on our some years ago, when there was the attempted coup to topple the government in Turkey, we actually had our second ecumenical trip planned for that year. And we had to cancel the Istanbul part of the trip and just stayed in Italy instead. That was back in 2016, I think. But yeah, it's they claim to be secular and non-religious, but everyone is a Muslim, and 4 times a day you hear the loudspeakers blast out the call to prayer.
That's not secular.
No, and it's particularly disconcerting when you're in the middle of a service or even a liturgy worse in St. George's Cathedral, and just outside the building, up on a pole, is a loudspeaker where the imam starts to call to prayer right in the middle of your Orthodox service going on, and you can't hear what's inside the church for all the noise going outside the church.
Well, back to the initial pilgrimage that you took.
Yes, sorry to digress. You can, yeah. And then of course, after we went to St. George, we had our private audience with Patriarch Bartholomew. It was lovely. He welcomed us, and the particular interesting part that I'll just mention was that we were 40 people, and we were gathered in a semicircle in front of the Patriarch in the audience room. Metropolitan Callistos was on one end of the semicircle, and I was on the other end. And the Patriarch came in and was very informal. He said, "Oh, good afternoon. How are you today?" It was, it was like we were his grandchildren coming to visit on a Sunday afternoon. It was very, very warm and friendly. Metropolitan Callistos then started his introductions of us as a group, why we were there and what we were doing. And he said to the patriarch that we were a group of 40 pilgrims, and we were going to Rome, and we were in Istanbul on an ecumenical trip, and 1/4 of our group was Eastern Orthodox, 1/4 or 25% were Roman Catholic, and 50% were Eastern or Byzantine Catholic. And the patriarch, who's listening to Callistos on one side, turns to me and says in a fairly loud voice that everyone heard, "Oh, so this time you have the majority."
Sorry.
So it's always a lot of fun when I visit His All Holiness, because he frequently jokes with me along those lines. So moving on, we then got on a flight to Rome from Istanbul, and we were transferred to our hotel in Rome. It was called Hotel 21. It was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 blocks walking distance to St. Peter's, so it was relatively close. And the program was to, of course, visit the major churches of Rome, Santa Maria Maggiore, St. John Lateran. We had a full tour of St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican Museum, the Sistine Chapel. All those things were tours. But I'll just cut to the chase and focus on the audience that we had with Pope Francis. Of course, we were all anxious to meet him. We were all dressed in our Sunday finest. So all the ladies had dresses and nice clothes. The men were in coats and ties, except there was one couple from Phoenix who were, a laid back sort of Southwestern rancher. And he came in, open collar shirt with a sport coat.
Yeah, that's his Sunday best. If you're a rancher, that is your Sunday best.
And I think I didn't look closely, but I bet you he had boots on. He was dressed up.
You were or weren't inside of a church?
We were, because we went from St. Peter's and the Sistine Chapel right to the audience.
Okay.
So there was not a chance to change. But to get to the audience, the bus was given special permission to drive into Vatican City. So we got on our bus after the tour at the Sistine Chapel and St. Peter's, which, is outside of Vatican City proper. The entrance is over on the border, if you will, to Italy, to Rome. So we got on the bus there. The bus, because we had, a special permission and everything, we were met by Monsignor Palmieri, who was one of the staff persons of the then Pontifical Council. Now it's the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity. And he met us at the gate to get into Vatican City and got on the bus. And then as we went past each checkpoint within Vatican City, we opened up the door, he showed his credentials, and we were waved on through. Went through, I don't know, 3 or 4 levels of security, and what drove all the way up to the closest point that the bus could get to the entrance to the Apostolic Palace. Up about 3 floors within the Vatican, there is a piazza, which has the entrance to the palace, which is off to the right as you look at St. Peter's from the square. And it's where you see the Pope wave from occasionally when he's at the Angelus or something like that. There's a particular window up in that top floor that is used for that. So our group was escorted up and into a private audience room. We had to go up in elevators. We had butlers in long tails, morning suits that were escorting us. And every time any of the bishop, the bishop at Papal or the clergy that were in cassock walked into a room, if there are any Swiss guards in there, they banged their pikes onto the ground in as respect of someone important entering the room. It was pretty dramatic. Anyway, we walked through half a dozen or so rooms to get to the audience room. We walked in and they had 40 chairs for us 40 people set up. And on each chair, already there was placed an English translation of what the Pope was going to say to us. He spoke to us in Italian. And so we were all in the audience room waiting. Cardinal Koch, the head of the Council for Christian Unity, was there in a chair off to the side. And over in the right corner, I noticed there was a big, large TV camera. Vatican TV was there and recorded the whole audience. So we were something special to the Vatican.
Hi, Mom. I'm on TV live from the Vatican.
So when the Pope walked in, of course, we immediately stood. I think, I don't remember if we broke out into song right away. We were such a mixed group. I don't think there was a single, hymn, like you would maybe with a large Roman Catholic group, that everyone knew the same words and the same melodies, because even the Eastern Catholics were for all the different traditions, Ukrainian, Melkite, Ruthenian, Romanian, and we all have different melodies, even for the same hymn or different translations. So it was, somewhat difficult to do something spontaneous. Anyway, the Pope walks in, goes up to the front chair and says, "Good morning to everyone." And then he starts reading his address in Italian. And so we all sit attentively listening to him. When he's done with his address, Metropolitan Callistos was invited up to the microphone to say a few words, and he just spoke extemporaneously. He spoke in English because he doesn't know Italian. And hopefully the Pope understands enough English to understand what was said. Anyway, it was a very, very pleasant experience to start. Then when the remarks were over, we all went up individually, one by one, to get a private blessing from His Holiness. And if you were, had thought in advance, people who knew and had been there before brought gifts. And so when you went up to get your blessing, you could give your gift to the Pope. Of course, he essentially, because he gets thousands of them every day, just hands them off to somebody. However, I stopped with my gift and explained it was an icon that we had commissioned of Peter and Andrew greeting each other, which is the traditional icon of church unity. And we had two made by an iconographer. One I'd given to the ecumenical patriarch and one to the Pope. And I told they were a matched pair and that they were small, square, with a nice thick board that would stand on its own. And so I suggested to him that he might put it on a bookcase in his study. So every time he saw it, he would think of his brother in Constantinople. And I essentially said the same sorts of words to ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, that when he sees it, that he might think and pray for his brother, the Pope in Rome. So it was, and I think, he really appreciated getting, a fairly unique gift along those lines. So I went up and of course I presented my icons, and others brought other kinds of gifts and things. And when everyone had been through and had received the blessing, we all sort of gathered in a semicircle with the Pope in the middle and Metropolitan Callistos. And Father Thomas Loya, who I mentioned at the very beginning, that was instrumental in connecting me with Viking travel, was along on the trip. And so I sort of nudged him and I said, "Father Tom, time for a Nohayalita." And so he intoned, "God grant you many years," for the Pope. And because of the 50% of the group that were Eastern Catholic, 50% of those were Ruthenians. And so I started as the cantor, singing God Grant You Many Years in our melody. And most people have been to one of our services, and so they joined in. And then as he acknowledged the song, he starts walking out. And then we went into the Slavonic version. And at that point, he turns around before he left the room to wave and acknowledge that we had kept, singing and praying for him. And he had a big smile on his face, as Pope Francis usually does. And then he left the room. And we were so filled with joy. It was an absolutely marvelous experience.
Sounds beautiful.
So
to have him
that was that.
Recognize that you're still going.
Yeah, that was the highlight of the trip. We then, as I said, saw a few more places, but we tried to schedule that towards the end of the whole 10 days so that it was the highlight of our experience.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So that was my first blast. Yeah, that was my first encounter and face-to-face with Pope Francis. And I've had two more since then, and maybe we'll talk about those at a future session.
Yes. All right. Is that all you got for us today?
I think so. I think that's enough for people to reflect on. It was really a marvelous experience, and I feel very blessed that the group joined me and that we were received so well in both Constantinople and Rome as an ecumenical group on pilgrimage.
Yes. Well then, I guess, to everybody listening, thank you again for coming to this episode of Jack's Corner, and we look forward to seeing you guys again next week with some announcements. All right, everybody, thank you for coming. Goodbye, and God bless.